Call into order the Tuesday, June 25th, 2013 meeting of the Township of South Orange Village Board of Adjustment. May we have a roll call?
Yes, Mr. Don.
Here.
Mr. Descala.
Here.
Mr. Groman. Mr. Parlapiano.
Here.
Mr. Reeves.
Here.
Mr. Semper.
Here.
Mr. Adler. Mr. Shapiro.
Here.
And Ms. Warren.
Here.
Adequate notice of this meeting has been provided to the public by posting on the bulletin board in Village Hall, the village's website, and the South Orange Maplewood News Record, and by filing said notice in the office of the village clerk. So the first order of business tonight, first of all, I'd like to apologize to the applicant, Seton Hall, for our starting late tonight. We'll try to see what we can do so it doesn't happen again. The first order of business is the approval of the resolution for LOJ Properties, 301 South Orange Avenue.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, there was a suggestion made today to add in the last portion of the resolution clarification that the actual vote was to approve the application, but it only received 4 affirmative votes, therefore it did not pass. Make that clarification as opposed to just saying it was denied. That was the proposal.
Yeah, one way to possibly do that is you could say vote on the action taken by the board to approve the application requires 5 of 7 votes. Maybe you could do that there.
Sure.
I was just thinking if somebody ever pulls the application out 5 years from now, it would be quite clear.
Good catch.
Right, basically the way the vote ran, there were more votes in favor than there were against. And if you didn't really understand the way the rules work, then you might be confused.
Sure, I can do that. Do you want me to add something else on the whereas clause?
Yes.
Whereas the vote to approve the application was failed to.
The vote on the application failed to win approval.
By a vote of 4-3 to
Yes.
meeting by
Yeah.
Okay.
Any other revisions to the resolution, which I think again was well written by Mr. Dwyer? Anything else? Any other comments? So then may we have a motion?
I'll move that we approve the resolution with the one change we just discussed.
Second.
Mr. Semper seconds.
Okay. Mr. Don.
Yes.
Mr. Descala.
Yes.
Mr. Parlapiano.
Yes.
Mr. Reeves.
Yes.
Mr. Semper.
Yes.
And Mr. Shapiro.
Yes.
Okay, so now we move on to the application this evening. This is Seton Hall University. This is a continuation from the May 7th meeting. This is for preliminary and final site plan and variances, C&D. The applicant is proposing to expand the parking deck to extend off the southwest corner of the existing parking structure. Good evening.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Kevin Coakley, the law firm of Connell Foley, on behalf of Seton Hall University. We were here last, I believe, on June the 4th, at which time there was testimony from Mr. Garbini of the university, Mr. DiGiacento of Langen Engineering, who did the site engineering, and then there was some testimony from Mr. Helmer, and there's one question I didn't ask him. He's the parking garage designer, which I'd like to call him back. And then after that call, 2 additional witnesses, Mr. Lothan, William Lothan, and Gregory Woodruff, both of Langen Engineering. One will testify about the parking situation, the other will testify about the variances. If you recall, this application involves a parking deck for 594 spaces, and after certain spaces will be lost because of restriping and integration, there'll be a net of about 556 spaces. There are 3 variances. One is a D6 height variance because the height of the garage is greater than 10% and 10 feet over the 30-foot limit. There's also a setback variance, and there's also a fence height variance. The testimony, just to briefly refresh your recollection, was that the parking situation at Seton Hall is governed by a municipal ordinance, and it requires a certain number of parking spaces, which Seton Hall presently meets, but because of the fact that their parking is not adequate, because there's a lot of times where all their lots and garages are filled, and people park illegally in the garage on occasion, or in lots, that they've decided that they need additional parking. There was also testimony that they have approximately 5,700 parking permits issued for 2,544 spaces. So they've issued over double the number of parking permits than the spaces that they have on campus. The testimony was that they looked at 2 locations for this garage. One location is the one that's before you. The other was near the athletic center, and they decided on this location really for a couple of reasons. One, because this garage is not as close to residential homes. Secondly, this garage is not as high as the one they would have had to build there. And thirdly, building by the athletic center would have affected the bus circulation. They need to have spots for buses around the athletic center. So they selected this spot. As I indicated, you heard testimony from the site engineer and Mr. Garbini. I'd like to call Mr. Helmer back very briefly for one question, and then move on to the other witnesses. Mr. Helmer, I think you've been previously sworn. All right. Should I proceed with him? Yep. Okay.
Yes, please.
Mr. Helmer, the width of the garage.
Do we have a second microphone?
No, we don't have a second microphone.
Okay.
So y'all
We'll make 2.
We're still on, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, there it is.
How wide is the garage?
The garage right now is approximately just over 106 feet wide.
All right, and could the garage be built any narrower than it is?
The garage, if it was built more narrower in width, then it would further impact the functional level of service of the patrons. As originally stated, we were looking for a variance for the 17-foot drive aisle. So if the width was further decreased, there would be a good impact to the level of service to the drivers. So the garage as it is right now in footprint really is at the minimum footprint in length and width.
All right, and that has to do with circulation? Is that what you're discussing?
Vehicular circulation, as well as the depth of stalls in the drive aisles. Right.
All right, I have no further questions for Mr. Helm.
Mr. Chairman? So we can ask questions?
Yes.
I can certainly understand that if you tried to keep 500 and whatever spaces and make it narrower, it wouldn't work. But did you look at how many spaces you could fit and stay within the zone?
In terms of the width of the garage?
That's right. So if you built it with a 30-foot setback, how many spaces could you fit in that garage?
If you would get approximately 250 to 275, because basically you'd be reducing that another 20 feet, which then would impact an entire row of parking as well as a portion of the drive aisle. So that would actually be a fairly significant impact.
So you are saying that 20 feet would reduce the parking by at least half?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear with the fan.
You are saying the 20 feet, if you were supposed to give that up, you would be losing half the amount of spaces?
You would have to actually reduce it, the full depth of a stall, which is 18, plus an additional 2 feet, which would then further reduce the drive aisle to a dimension of 15 feet with a singly loaded bay. So that would further impact the drive aisle dimension if you were to do that.
And all of that would cause you to only have about 298 spaces?
Right. It's not only the reduction in the number of spaces based on that entire drive aisle for the 300-foot length, but then also going from a 17-foot drive aisle down to a 15, so it's almost a double impact there to do that. And we feel comfortable right now from a parking perspective that the module of 53 and the drive aisle of 17, we feel comfortable that that's an acceptable level of service, and anything that would reduce that would be from our perspective, unacceptable.
When you use the term level of service, what are we looking at? Are you talking about a C?
Well, currently it's approximately a C, level of service C, okay, which generally parking structures are designed to. If you were to reduce that any further, especially with the drive aisle, you would be at least a level of service D.
Okay, jargon alert.
Yeah, what do you mean by level of service?
Well, level of service A being the highest and best level of service for the patrons, which is the most comfortable and the most convenient, down to less than a level of service D, you wouldn't even build a garage. So from A to D is really what it is.
Those levels of service can be defined in many ways. The throughput, the amount of time somebody has to wait to get through an intersection is common. Those are kind of things that make it go down a level.
How about safety?
Right.
Safety in there?
Could we ask the board members to also speak in the microphone, because we really can't hear them?
I know, I was right there.
Okay, let's make sure we're probably not even so much speaking in the microphone. Does that make a difference if I do that?
That
Makes
helps.
a big
It does?
difference, yeah.
All right, so speak into the microphone and speak up with the fan going. Okay, did you have a question, Ms. Warren?
I just asked if the level of service also reflected safety, a diminution of safety.
Did you hear that? Did the level of service reflect safety?
Yes, level of service, it reflects not only comfort for the vehicles and the patrons, but also safety.
So if we asked you to move it from what's now where it is down to a D, then it would be less safe for the students.
That's correct.
Mr. Don?
To follow on this line that Mr. Parlapiano started, if I look at your drawing A1.1, which is your floor plan, and the bottom of the plan sheet has the row of the parking that would be closest to the park. So if we eliminated that row but kept the rest of the structure the same, eliminated that aisle all the way across. Now, we wouldn't get to a complying setback, but we'd get much closer to a complying setback. We'd lose 30 cars times 5 levels, so we'd lose 150 cars.
Correct.
So we'd be at 440 minus whatever you lose by striping. So
That's
roughly
right.
400 cars, between 400 and 420.
That's correct, yeah. The other
So
impact,
I guess that's going to lead to the next question, is does the traffic study bear out the need for 594 additional cars?
okay.
I'm not asking you to answer
Right.
that. That's,
Very good, Mr. Dan. That's what I was looking for.
okay.
Thank you.
Okay, do we have other questions from the board? How about our experts?
Let me just, I'm sorry.
Do you want to add something?
I just want to ask him one redirect question.
Sure.
You You testified previously that, in your opinion, this garage is necessary to meet the need that's been expressed to you by the university?
That's correct.
And you testified previously that there is a good practice would be to have 10% more parking spaces than the need?
Correct.
Is that still your testimony?
It is.
Do we have any questions?
I don't.
Mr. Dwyer?
I had a question. Mr. Don, the proposal that you just mentioned about eliminating that one parking aisle, what would the setback then be?
Well, you would probably pick up 15 or 16 feet in setback along that side.
Yeah, probably about
So
that.
You wouldn't have 30 feet, but you might have between 24 and 26 feet.
The other thing to think about is if you did eliminate that end bay parking, so to speak, so at the end you just had a drive aisle, one of the considerations is the stair tower in the one corner. Right now, from a patron and I guess safety standpoint, it's tucked in to the corner and actually abuts against the adjacent stall. If we were to remove the end bay parking, we would still require that stair for 300-foot walking distance in the garage, but that stair would be pushed to a point now that it's very close to the end bay drive aisle.
I don't see how this stair is in the upper left corner of our plan.
Correct. Right.
How would eliminating the parking at the bottom have anything to do with that? In other words, I'm talking about eliminating the parking along the east side and leaving the rest of the structure the same. I'm not sure how that would have any effect on the stair.
Okay. That's true. That's true. Yeah, my misunderstanding.
Okay.
We have other questions? Our experts, do y'all have any questions? Do we have any questions from members of the public? Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I'm told that those people over there want to get in that room.
Into our back room.
Come on in. Why are they meeting? Excuse me. Meeting back there.
Is to take all this off, bring the column line into here.
Right, okay.
And actually, that doesn't save you the whole thing, because the column line really needs to be outboard of the aisle. So you need a 5 feet here.
All right, let's continue.
Oh, okay. I'd like to call Mr. William Lothian.
Please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm the testimony you'll give here this evening is the whole truth?
I do.
Please state your name and address for the record.
William Lothian, 619 River Drive, Glenwood Park, New Jersey.
All right, Mr. Lothian, who is your employer?
I'm a senior associate in the firm of Langen Engineering and Environmental Services. I've been with Langen for over 40 years.
And what is your role at Langen?
I'm a licensed professional engineer, and I'm a traffic engineer I have a Bachelor of Science in Civil Engineering from Newark College of Engineering and a Master of Science in Traffic and Transportation from NJIT. I'm also a fellow in the Institute of Transportation Engineers.
Could you speak a little closer to the mic? It's difficult to hear you with the fan.
Maybe raise it up.
Raise the mic up.
You can raise the stand up. Or just take it out there. Okay, do we have questions? Do you want him to repeat his credentials? Do we have questions for
But I'd
Mr.
like to-
Lothian?
I have a little bit more testimony.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. And can you give the board an idea of your work experience?
Yes, I've prepared traffic studies and signalization plans and roadway design for hundreds, if not thousands, of different projects throughout the 43 years that I've been an engineer. I've testified before many boards, including this village's boards years ago.
All right, and have you analyzed parking requirements before?
Yes, I have.
All right. And just give the board some idea of what circumstances you examine parking requirements.
You examine whether there's enough parking or sometimes whether there'd be too much parking, but most often we would prepare parking studies if we think that we need less parking than the ordinance would require. In this particular case, we're looking for more parking than the ordinance requires.
All right, I'd like to offer Mr. Lothian as an expert witness in the field of transportation planning and specifically parking requirements.
Do we have any questions for Mr. Lothian? No questions? All right, the board recognizes you as an expert.
Thank you.
All right, Mr. Lothian, can you tell the board generally what you did in order to prepare for this evening?
Yes, in February of this year, Langen prepared a traffic circulation and parking assessment as it relates to the parking garage expansion. As noted in that February assessment, the garage expansion itself does not generate additional trips to the university campus per se, but rather those additional spaces are going to support an identified need for additional parking on campus to address the existing trips. The new garage will reduce the number of trips that currently come onto campus, can't find a parking space, and then exit the campus to find parking elsewhere. You know, although the university meets, actually it exceeds the minimum village ordinance requirement for parking spaces on site. Only 2,088 spaces are required by ordinance, and we are providing currently 2,544 parking spaces to service students, faculty, staff, and with that, there is currently a shortfall in available parking spaces. The number of parking permits that are issued by the university is more than double the number of parking spaces that are actually available on campus. The proposed expansion will minimize that existing shortfall of parking on campus. To support some of our analysis, the university performed a 23-day campus-wide parking count study that identified the number of vacant parking spaces on different days and during different times and different hours of those days to assess when the parking garage and the parking lots were at capacity. The university's study was supplemented by personal observations of on-site parking vacancies by Langen staff, including myself. Langen performed a summary assessment to summarize the parking space vacancies on campus with two different reports. One was dated May 9th of this year, as well as some supplemental data in a memo dated May 23rd of this year, and we understand both of those reports were provided to the board. The reports identify the total number of students, administration, staff, and faculty at 8,352 persons, and also indicate that there are 5,768 parking permits issued by the university to commuter students, resident students, employees, adjuncts, priests, vendors, and evening students. And only 2,544 parking spaces are actually available on campus. The amount of parking permits is more than double the amount of available parking on campus. The studies indicated that there were many hours and many days throughout those days where no available parking spaces existed on campus, including in particular the parking deck. And we heard before testimony that the optimal parking deck occupancy would be 90%. There are numerous occasions, frequently, where this particular existing parking garage is over 100% occupancy. I would like to show some charts that were provided to the board. This.
Before you do that, let's mark this as, I don't remember where we are.
I have up to A8.
A8.
So this would be A9.
This may, okay, Ms. Sullivan, if you could just identify it for the record.
This is a table titled Parking Lot Count Tuesday, January 29, 2013. And this particular chart is the same one that we submitted to the board that was colored blue, but I wanted to show you the unblued copy first. What this shows is Lot A from 8 o'clock in the morning through 12, 1, 2, and 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So for each parking lot and each garage, the garage deck, it shows how many available parking spaces there are in that facility for each hour throughout the day. Now there's 23 different days that we're counting as part of the assessment. This particular day, and I want to focus on this one, shows so many zeros along in here that shows that at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, every parking lot was filled to capacity. The faculty lot had 2 spaces available in it.
Got to talk into that microphone. I'm getting a signal.
The faculty lot had 2 spaces available, and the parking deck was completely full. All levels were full on this particular day during that hour. And you'll notice 12 o'clock, all levels were full as well. What we did and what we submitted to the board was a copy of the same day that indicated in blue those hours of all 23 days, that at least for 1 hour of one of those 23 days, that parking lot or that parking deck was full to capacity. There was no available spaces. So this particular board shows so many days, so many hours throughout this particular day, but it also covers a summary of the other days where there was no available parking space. Some of the red numbers that we put in there are some of the parking for the minimum number of parking spaces that were available on those particular hours. But it does show how many hours through how many days there were no available parking spaces on campus.
Okay, Mr. Lothian, we have a question for you.
Yes.
Could you just go over again, if it's marked blue, a box means that at some point during the 23 days, that time, that lot did not have any capacity.
That is correct.
At one point, does it indicate on how many of those 23 days it did not have any?
Yes, we did a count of the 23 days, and we came up with, there was six days, there was 6 days. The parking garage was completely full for at least 1 hour on a total of 6 different days of those counted. So 6 days, the entire parking garage was full, at least for an hour, but in most cases for more than 1 hour. On 5 additional days, so that's 11 days out of the 23-day count, 5 additional days, the only available parking in the garage was located on the top level of the parking deck, and that count of available parking spaces ranged from 15 to 88 spaces. So
does that mean for 1 hour of that day, or does that mean
for one particular hour in that day? So there was no available parking spaces in for that particular hour of that day. Well, you'll notice on this particular day on the blue for Tuesday, January 29th, there was no available spaces in the deck through 12 o'clock through 1 o'clock, and then by 2 o'clock there was 38 spaces that became available. On the ground lots, all the ground lots, Lot A, Lot D, E, F, and Duffy, and the faculty lots, the lots were all totally occupied on 4 of the 23 counted days. Other days showed a few available spaces, particularly out on Lot D, which is closest to South Orange Avenue. It's further away from the center of the campus. Following last meeting, Eric had mentioned to me after the meeting, perhaps you could show an average of the 23 days. An average doesn't really propose the right answer that we're looking for. We want to show how many days the actual lot was totally occupied. If you average in the occupancies for all the days, for each lot, for each hour, we did do an average. We have to mark this one. Yeah, so mark that one.
So the blue table is A10.
We did do an average, an overall average, but that didn't mean anything because Fridays, particularly on Fridays, are lightly occupied days or lightly parked days as compared with another day.
Excuse me, Mr. Lothian, wasn't the blue one marked A9, Mr. Coakley?
No, A10. I thought you said the first one would be A9.
Yes. The
A9
first one
was the first one, blue one was A10.
Oh, okay.
A9 was the one for the particular day of
Oh, okay.
January 29th.
A9 is the unblued one.
All right, thank you.
Now, A11 will be a parking lot count. It's the same base count day, but it's through March 20th. So it's all the days, the average between Tuesday, January 29th, through March 20th of this year. And it's the average vacancies excluding Fridays, because Fridays would just skew the average so it wouldn't show a representative sample of, full parking lots. So when you're just looking at the average, taking Fridays out, still we're looking at an average of 23 other days. You're still seeing zeros in Lot A. You're seeing one car available in Lot F. Duffy, there's never any parking available in Duffy. Faculty lot has one space available. And then on an average, if you take Fridays out, there's still maybe 50 to 76 parking spaces available in a garage when you're looking at an average. But the average is not really what we're focusing on. We're focusing on there is days, 6 days, almost 6 days with extra days where the entire parking garage is full and the lots were full as well. So we're looking at cases where there is no available parking on campus.
And Mr. Lothian, we have a question for you.
Yes.
Yes. On days when, or times when there's no available parking on campus, where do the student or faculty park if they can't find a place on campus?
Well, the faculty has their lots. If they can't find a space on campus, they drive around. Some would park in areas where there should not be parking allowed, not striped parking. Some will sit there and wait for a parking space to open up, and others will leave the campus, go out and find spaces off-site.
Do you know if there are any students who are missing classes because they can't find a convenient parking space?
I am not aware whether there is students missing classes, but this is a good possibility.
Do you want to have Mr. Garabini?
Yes, you want to hear from him now answering that question?
Sure. Yeah, answer the question.
Okay.
Yeah, please.
As I indicated when I spoke earlier, there's a level of frustration that not only causes some students to not only have to leave campus looking for parking and then return, but also miss class, or in fact, if they eventually find parking and it makes them late for class. But that level of frustration is what we're looking to avoid, because it adds to the satisfaction and the retention of the students at the university.
Mr. Garbini, is it true, as it's been said, that people don't want to give up their parking spot?
That's correct, because even if someone has to leave in the middle of the day for one reason or another, they will just or has a gap in their classes, they just are not going to take their car and run an errand and come back because they'll for fear of losing that spot. Same is true of the faculty and employees.
Do you actually have complaints registered with the university about students who can't get to class because they can't find a parking space or because of their level of frustration? I mean, how is that evidenced to you?
Via letters, via complaints to the various offices, including the president's office, exit interviews by individuals who are transferring from campus, and the frustration. Again, I think I spoke about this early on when I testified earlier, that in recent years it's been a little bit quieter, but we're now back to some really tight parking situations, particularly exacerbated by the fact that local streets have parking has become more restricted. So we've seen quite a bit of frustration and a number of students indicating that parking was a problem as to why they may be selecting to leave the university.
Is that in any way related to the fact that you issued twice as many parking permits as there are parking spaces available?
Well, the difficulty is if we stop selling parking decals, then what does that say to the student? The issue is we're trying to manage our parking situation, which is bringing us to why we're here tonight and why we're looking to build a parking garage the size that we're looking at. It's really the survival of our institution for the future.
But the additional parking doesn't reduce the ratio. If you look at the ratio right now, it's 2-to-1. If you added 594, the ratio doesn't change.
The ratio doesn't change, but in fact, we see norms changing. I think that's probably a societal thing as well. It's not all of us. How many cars are in our driveways and our parking garages, and your home and my home? It's quite different from when I was, a 22-year-old. There might have been one car, and it was a big deal if there were two cars. Now there's sometimes more cars than there are people and drivers.
Yeah, I'm not sure where I'm a bit confused as to the question. Mr. Simple, when you talk about the ratio, what were you referring to?
Well, right now, with the amount of decals that are given out to the population, it's like a 2-to-1. And if you add the 594, the ratio still remains the same. Of 2-to-1, it doesn't say that if you add 594, suddenly there must, there's more spaces. The population and ratio still goes to the same amount.
It can't stay the same. I mean, if you add more spaces, it changes.
Well, you're talking about the ratio of tickets sold or
That's right.
Right, but that's
Yeah,
not
but if
connected to the number of spaces.
Yeah, but if you add 594, they're gonna increase the number of spaces that they're gonna sell. They are not gonna only sell 2,500.
Well, you can ask them that question.
I really, the survival of and the thriving of our institution doesn't rest on how many parking decals we sell. And in fact, it's often said that the decals just a permit, a hunting permit, if you will. The issue really is that we have enough parking to satisfy the needs of our community. And the needs of the community, the university at large, isn't sometimes just what's happening in the classrooms. There are times that the community of the village of South Orange has asked to use meeting rooms that we have on campus, but we've had to refuse, whether it's a lecture or whether it's one of your graduations. If we have classes on campus, we just cannot also have any other activity. So this parking garage, even though we'd have to be very careful about it, during the slower periods of the year would also allow the Essex County occasionally will have events on the park. And they are very generous. We have relationships when we can use the park, and they allow us to use it, and we allow them to use campus and the parking. And this parking garage provides capacity during those periods of times as well. So it's the ratio of 2 to 1.5 is a guideline, but the real thing we have to look at is what's going on in the parking lots, and what's going on with the level of frustration, and what's going on with our ability to utilize our campus and to allow our institution to thrive. I'm sorry.
Mr. Don?
Yeah. I'd like to get back to Mr. Lothian, because I think I want to sort of refocus what we're talking about. So there's 2,500 plus or minus spaces now available.
Yes.
And your counts, if we go to, not the blue one, but the one after the blue one, your counts are indicating that on a Monday through Thursday, not counting Fridays, go to the next one.
That's again on average.
Yeah, no, I understand. What I'm trying to get at is, of that 2,500, we have somewhere in the neighborhood of, I don't know, 100, between 75 and 120 spaces available on a typical Monday through Thursday. I'm trying to get at,
On
how
average.
much of that 2,500 is filled?
Right, that's on average, but I mentioned
No, I
6
understand.
days, the entire campus, every parking space was full. 6 days out of the 20.
Okay, yeah, no, he's flashing, he's not getting you, so, is the mic on? Not now, not now. No, I am just trying to get.
Better?
Yeah, much better.
So what I mentioned was 6 days out of the 23-day counter. 25% of the days that were counted, every parking space on campus was filled.
For a portion of the
For
day.
a portion of the day.
Okay.
Which makes it, that frustration factor comes in for every other student, every other faculty member who might want to come in during that period of time. And that's 6 days. That's 25% of the days had at least 1 hour, and for all intents and purposes, it's more than 1 hour.
So
of
would you
full
say,
parking lots.
so would you say that, in general, that the 2,544 spaces is, what's the right word, is not quite enough spaces for the campus as it currently exists? And that you would, if we're using the 10% rule, that we should have another 250, 300 spaces?
Well, that would be 10% typically for a garage occupancy, yeah.
I guess what I'm trying to get at is, where did the number of spaces, of additional spaces, come from?
Well, it's a combination of several things. One, it's to identify the need between the number of parking permits and the number of students and the available spaces. One is the area, the proposed expansion, is reasonable. It also maximizes the use of an area that's already been developed. It's in an area which was tennis court, so it's in an area that was developed. The building footprint and the height of that proposed expansion, it's necessary so the university would never have to expand again. Once this deck goes in and it's expanded, you will not be able to go back in. You will not be able to come back in and redevelop 2 more levels of parking if you only put in 3 levels of parking, say. You just couldn't go back in the way the construction would have to be done. So once you're going to do it, you're going to do it once for the occupancy that they believe is necessary at this time, and to accommodate whatever potential future there might be.
So it seems to me that it's not just a count issue, it's, in this area, how many parking spaces can you get?
Well, it's also a continuation. This is going to look aesthetically like a continuation of the existing parking garage. It's the same height. It'll look like one building.
But it's also asking for a setback variance, and it's hard up against that park with
It
a
is.
facade that, you know, looks like a parking garage.
That's
You know,
correct.
Let me ask the witness a question. You studied parking in this situation?
Yes.
You studied in
Use the
shopping centers?
microphone.
Yes.
You've studied in shopping centers?
Yes.
Have you studied it in institutional situations?
Yes.
Would anyone running a shopping center or an institutional situation be comfortable when your lot was filled 25% of the days and there was no space for people to park?
No.
Would they automatically be thinking of adding more parking?
They would most definitely be thinking of adding more parking if the space was available. In this particular case, we're trying to maximize the number of spaces in this particular area to support an identified need, and also in an area that's already been
Is there
developed.
let me please finish.
Go ahead.
Is there any place on campus where you could put more surface parking, realistically?
No.
What is the expansion of the parking spaces involved in this application? What percentage?
It's 556. It'll give you a total of
About
3,082. It's
About 20% over existing, is that
Yes.
fair to say? And you testified, and there was prior testimony about a 10% leeway of having some play in the joints, is that
That's
correct?
typically for garage design, yes.
Given the things you've testified to, and in your professional opinion, do you have any doubt that this garage is appropriately sized for Seton Hall University?
I believe it is properly sized. You know, some additional observations that I had when I was out there in the field. I just went out there on a Monday. It was while school was still in session. You know, I only found 6 vacant parking spaces in Lot D. That's closest to South Orange Avenue. There was 2 handicap spaces available in Lot E. There was no open spaces at all in Lot A and F. And there was only, at that particular day, 74 spaces were available in the parking garage in that particular Monday, but they were all on the upper deck, on the upper level. Every other level was filled in the garage. I mean, this 556 spaces, you know, it's to support this observed shortfall. There is more parking that is needed on this campus. The university did their own study, although the village ordinance is only 2,088 spaces. More often than not, if we're coming for a variance, we want to provide less parking spaces. We don't think we need them. We know we need them because there's parking in spaces where there are no spaces, parking off-site, which we'd like to contain some of those students and commuters on-site rather than having to park in leased spaces and off-site street spaces where they might park illegally, because there is a lot more restrictions on the residential streets now than there has been in the past.
But my point is not that there shouldn't be parking. My point is that I'm not sure, I'm still not convinced about the number. I think the number is based on the space that's available, more than it's based on. I mean, I'm not convinced that 400 or 420 spaces wouldn't satisfy what you need as opposed to 550 spaces. So, but maybe I can be convinced. So
If I could ask a follow-up question just along the same line. I mean, do you have a number for the number of spaces that are necessary to meet the current need, and a separate number for the number of spaces that are meant to meet future needs?
I don't have a separate number. I just know that from our observations and the counts that have been done, there is days when you can't find a space, you can't buy a space, and there's a lot of people coming on site, turning around and going back out.
There's no doubt that there's a need.
There is definite need, and you know, there's efficiencies. If you put in 1.5 parking bays in a garage, the efficiencies are terrible. You're only providing 1.5 instead of a 2-bay where you can have adequate circulation around and service the maximum number of spaces per level. If you have only 1/2 a bay on one of the access aisles, it's very inefficient.
Same line of questioning about how you determine the number of spaces that are needed. There's a lot that impacts why the congestion happens when it does. One of the things you said in one of the memos was the overlap time between daytime students and nighttime students causes congestion. Although you stopped the parking study at 3 p.m., But there are other things that cause congestion. So for example, the fact that Friday is a light day for classes means that Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday are heavier days for classes. The fact that classes get scheduled more toward the middle, I would assume that what you're seeing is a reflection of the scheduling policy of classes. And so I wonder, as you're studying, for you to sit down and say, let me create an optimal parking plan, you need to take into account what's the scheduling, right? How can the scheduling be adjusted? You need to take into account events that are being held. You need to take into account how many of the students live within, a certain radius and could choose to walk if they needed to. There's a lot more to take into account. And I'm wondering, did you look at all of that? Or did you just say, given total existing conditions and no other changes, the lots are full?
Well, again, the lots are obviously full.
I understand that. I'm asking what level, I'm not disputing the observation, right? Because I assume those facts are facts, right? I'm asking, as a parking engineer, if you were called in fresh to this situation, and someone said, come study my school and give us a way that you would think about the required number of spaces, what would you look at?
We'd look at how the existing parking garage existed and operated, whether this proposed parking deck that will be connected to the existing parking deck, how it will be serviced and operate, how it will look in conjunction with the existing parking deck. The fact that we'd only want to build a parking deck one more time. And if 250 spaces were an identified need now, which I'm not saying it is, but there could be at least that, to provide the extra 556 total spaces in that garage,
right now there are policies in place. Freshmen, I think, from what we were told last time, are not allowed to have cars. Sophomores and juniors who live on campus are not allowed to have cars on campus, can't buy permits.
Correct. If there was any change in that policy.
These are policy statements intended, I think, to say to students, there are some of you who can't get permits, right? Did you look at things like, could you say if you live within 1 mile, 1.5 miles of campus, you can't get a permit? Did you look at, my point is, the university already has policies in place that to some extent drive the parking demand, right? And so if you sat there and said, I'll allow anyone who wants to come to campus and have a car, whether you're a freshman, a sophomore, or junior, whether you live on campus or not, the demand would be higher, I suspect, right? The university has already taken policy steps to hold down demand, right? There are other, so that in planning parking, you need to look at the combination of policy changes that could be made, policy implications of those policy changes. As we heard testimony, they have an implication on students feeling like they want to go to school there, right? But it's a combination of factors. It's not just how many cars are there. The parking study is a policy question.
That's correct, but there also could be policy changes to keep up with the changing student times. Students are more demanding. If they want to go to a university, they might want.
And so then I'd like to hear testimony. Right? So for example, the testimony could be,
but again,
we need to start allowing sophomores and juniors who live on campus to have cars on campus. Or freshmen to, but that would show why 575, right? Well, and I think you're hearing from us is just, what is it? I know the site, fitting it in there, you got 575, I get that, right? You got 4 bays, you got 5 stories, it matches existing, and that equals 575 or 590 or something, right? The question we're asking you as a parking engineer is how would you go about determining need?
In the absence of knowing that you could build this structure, I think is
right. In a greenfield case, right? How would you go about determining need? And my assumption is, as I've said, that it's not simply that it's a complicated question because it has to do with university policies, it has to do with university scheduling practices, it has to do, with event planning. There's a lot that goes into this.
Exactly right, and that's the conversations that we've had with the university in these numerous months that we've been preparing our studies. It's the conversations that we had that identified this need that the university believes they have for the additional parking.
So from those conversations, are there policy changes planned that would drive demand to fill 575?
I'm not aware of any specific policy changes.
Are there other changes? I mean, so if what you're saying is your parking recommendation about 570, I keep using that number. No, it's not the right number. It's
556.
But are there other changes in conditions that led you to say this is the right number of spaces?
Other than all the ones he's testified to already? I mean, he's been testifying for an hour.
So the testimony I've heard is...
Well, I mean, if I might finish. I mean, the testimony you've heard is that there's an extreme need for parking. There's basically no play in the existing situation, that you should have at least 10% more parking than your demand. You should have some leeway, and there's no leeway now. And this is a 20% increase, 10% of which can be devoted to just having some flexibility. I think it's a rather obvious set of circumstances.
Well, obviously you think it's obvious, and obviously I think it's not obvious.
Well, look, one of the things that Mr. Parlapiano might be referring to that I see, if I'm going to follow on what you're saying, you tell me if this is where you're thinking, is from 9 to 10 o'clock. I'm looking at your Tuesday sheet here, not the averages.
The actual sheets.
But it's not blued out from 9 to 10. I remember when I was in college, I didn't want to get up, and I know my professors didn't want to get up. And so 9 and 10 o'clock,
that's right. And I'm not. And
it
again,
looks like there's not a lot of classes going on.
I understand,
maybe.
but my point is
that what you're getting at?
That's exactly right. And so the parking demand is a combination of university policies and student habits, right? I mean, it's the mix of students who are not residents, the mix of students who don't live close by. It's a
Because
complicated.
people don't always change their policies to try to impose requirements on people that they are servicing. A shopping center doesn't tell people not to come to dinner between 6 and 7 because we have a very high parking demand. Because if you do that, you end up having no customers. And a university is in the same situation. If you make the situation uncomfortable for the students or the faculty, people are going to resent it, and they're not going to participate in the function as much as they would. And that's what Mr. Garbini has testified to.
It sounds like that's what you're testifying to. I understand that argument.
My question is specifically for the parking engineer, the person who ran the study, to ask what's the model you use to come up with size and demand. That's all I'm asking.
It sounds like he's answered it as just what he's done, which has to do with the number of spaces that were filled at given times. They didn't consider these other policies.
Well, actually, I'm not sure he's provided his math. I mean, one of the things that he could have said is that there are 2,000 spaces currently. They're 100% occupied frequently. If we were to provide 10% additional spaces plus a buffer for the unknown of how much overflow there is, maybe 15% of the original spaces, then you'd multiply that by the existing spaces and come up with a number, and that would be your current need, right? And then on top of that, he could have told us, for example, that based on student enrollment growth, et cetera, we anticipate a future growth in need of Y. So we've got X and Y, you add them together and you come up with 585 spaces. We haven't heard that kind of math yet, and I think that's perhaps what's frustrating some of the board members. That's the basic part, unrelated to the policy.
Why don't you go over your math one more time?
Again, it's been with conversations with the university. If you're looking at 2,544 existing parking spaces that are totally occupied, there's a lot more people coming on site that are going off site. People are parking in leased spaces in leased parking lots. People are parking on South Orange Avenue in leased spaces. And some are parking in illegal spaces or on residential streets. If you're looking at just the 10% over
To get the first 10%, that's 250 more spaces that you require just to be comfortable, so you have a totally completely occupied lot and you get 10% over. Now you have to bump it up for the number of spaces that are actually in need, which have not been identified yet. So if you're looking at another 10 or 15%, you're looking at upwards over 400 to 500 spaces. We're looking at 556 spaces because it's a convenient, it's a circulation pattern that's known to all students. It's a one-way circulation pattern in the garage. Everybody knows how to get in and out of the garage efficiently. It's an extension of the existing garage. It's the same height, so every deck will have its own continuation onto the additional deck. So it's a circulation pattern that will be understood by the students. They can get in and get out efficiently. That's why we're looking at the 5 levels. We're looking at 556 parking spaces. And you're going to look at, you're needing that to get the comfort level to get 10% over, plus another 10 to 15% that are parked in off-site parking spaces now. There's people in off-site lots. You'd have to pick up those spaces, plus the people that are coming on-site that leave the site to go find a space elsewhere. So the combination of all of those, you're getting up to where you're close to 556 spaces, and no sense in building 400 and then 2 years later you want to build another level, but there's no room to build another level. We want to see that the 556 spaces makes the most sense for this garage at this time.
Mr. Shapiro?
Yes. First of all, I'm not sure I'd agree that the needs, parking needs for students of a university are comparable to the customers of a large retail shopping mall. Most shopping malls devote a lot more area to the actual parking lot than they do to the retail space itself, but that's beside the point. What I'd like to pursue is a couple of questions that might help me get a better grasp on what's happening here. As a parking engineer, have you performed any similar studies with other comparable institutions?
You've done studies at...
Similar parking,
yes.
Flow, parking need?
Yes.
Studies for other colleges or universities of roughly comparable size?
Yes.
Okay. Could you give me some ratios of the amount of parking spaces in those other universities or comparable institutions to the student bodies as compared with Seton Hall? How do those ratios compare?
I don't have that data. Most of those universities had a significant amount of on-grade parking and additional lots that they constructed. I don't know the numbers of the ratios at this time.
Could you be a little specific? Give me an example of another similar case.
I couldn't tell you numbers, so I'd only be guessing.
Okay, can you also tell me whether or not, perhaps you're not the right person to ask this question, but is convenient on-campus parking one of the conveniences or one of the attributes cited in the university's promotional material to attract new students?
No, it isn't.
Mr. Garabini, if you're going to answer, you need to go to the microphone.
Clearly it isn't, because that wouldn't be, we couldn't bear that out.
So there's no representation of any kind made to commuter students regarding the availability of parking. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you.
But on the other side, it would be important to me as a student that there should be convenient, available parking for me if I do want to go to that university.
If I'm going to a shopping mall and I can't find parking at Short Hills, that might send me to Rockaway Mall where I can find parking. If I am a student and I'm having to drive onto campus and pay a small fortune to be able to afford the tuition at that institution, the last thing I want to be faced with is the inability to find parking and cause me to miss class, or have my faculty member show up late for class because he or she was unable to find parking for class. So this is a neuralgic issue for a university, and it's difficult to compare any one institution against another without knowing the difference between a school like NJIT, which has very little in the way of residential residence halls, versus the University of state institution in the middle of nowhere that has tons of surface parking. And even at those institutions, parking becomes an issue.
I specified comparable universities.
It's different.
Which, not colleges or universities in the middle of nowhere, but something like Caden College, something like Drew. I don't really have any idea what their parking facilities are for
Those,
students.
yeah, you're right. I mean, there's probably some way to come up with some comparables, but it would be difficult to find any one individual who has that experience at any of those institutions. But one thing I can tell you is as a higher ed professional, business officer, when I go to conference, parking is always an issue. Even for schools in the middle of, that have, 100 acres of fields, they still have parking as an issue. At our institution, it's in particular an issue. And you just cannot charge the appropriate level of tuition to run a quality institution and then have the individuals who are paying for that have the difficulty being able to find a place to park and time to get to class.
I have a specific question which I hope can help bring this this line of questioning to resolve, and that is, as a part of your study, were you able to ascertain how many people are in fact on campus in some of those busy times? Because then perhaps we could deduce the estimate of spaces being appropriate or something along those lines. So,
well, we do have the number of students, daytime students, nighttime students, faculty. That was in the one of the memos that we submitted.
The May 9th memo has those numbers.
and so how many students would be on campus
Well, that's my point about
There's a
policy.
total of 6,818 students.
at the same time?
At
would
the
be
same
there?
time, there's commuter students, 3,400 commuter students. Resident students, there's 392 that are on campus. Employees, there's 687. Adjuncts, there's 275. Priests, 48. Vendors come on campus, 64. And then the evening students, there's 888 evening students. So one of the things that was mentioned that later in the afternoon, when the exiting students start and the entering students come in, that's one of the things where we were looking at two-way circulation around the back of the athletic center. That's one of the things I didn't mention yet, but it's one of the circulation benefits to allow people to exit out to Seton Drive at two locations rather than the one existing location. But when you're looking at potential congestion at Seton Drive and the single garage entry-exit, by providing that separate second egress out to Seton Avenue, we'll be able to allow students that are heading towards South Orange Avenue to the east to go around the athletic center and then also improve the level of operation at both Seton Drive intersections. But again, the number of students is significant compared to the number of available parking spaces.
Mr. Lothian, can you repeat for me again? It sounds like you were relying upon a maximum of parking studies, something about you want to have 10% excessive open spaces in any given institution in any given time. Well, can you repeat that for me? That seems to be sort of
that's a typical parking garage design estimate. They typically like to have a 90% occupancy would be an acceptable design. If you're continuously running at 100% occupancy, there's something wrong with the garage.
Okay, so on those averages that you showed on that other, it showed between 70 and 100 or so open spaces on average in the middle of the week when classes are taking place. 50 to 70, I'm sorry.
50 to 70, well, that's in the garage.
In the garage.
Averaged over the.
Average open spaces.
Right.
In
And
the
again,
middle of the week.
Some of those days, there might not have been a lot of occupancy in the garage because of people not on campus, and that average would then skew because of 1 or 2 days that had a lot of available parking spaces in the garage.
And this special blue stuff here that you put, that signals what? How many?
That, at least one day throughout the 23 days counted during that particular hour, there was no available parking spaces.
Okay, one day.
At
Okay,
least
so-
at least 1 hour on all of those hours that are blued out.
Okay. So there's the numbers that I think, Mr. Parlapana, you were looking at. I guess one question I've had from the beginning, and even just intuitively trying to understand this, and I want to make sure I understand Mr. Garabini, is that you're intending this for current students, current faculty, current visitors. There's no plans here for expansion of students. Not that I'm saying that that's just, that that's wrong, but there are some open spaces. Is there contemplation that you may be bringing on more students in the future?
I believe back when I was speaking originally that I talked about that we had a number of years where we've had a number of fluctuating enrollment, and in fact 2 years ago we had 970 students. Last year we made adjustments to our enrollment processes and we brought in 1,400. Now that 1,400 and that 970 are going to have to flow through the system. What our intention is to even this back out to where it had originally been planned to be, about just north of 1,250 incoming freshmen. So this year we're looking to be successful along those lines. So it's not so much that we're not looking to grow. We're looking to be able to attract the appropriate number to our size of incoming, not only undergraduate, but also graduate students, which is a difficult challenge with the competition. But it's also not only the quantity, but the quality of the individuals that we're seeking to attract to the institution. And what we look at, by the way, to monitor and try and control what's happening on campus in terms of the heads, not the cars, is really classroom utilization. Not so much what's happening in the parking lot, because that sometimes is the result of what's happening in the classrooms. So that's how we try and monitor what's going on in our facilities. And Fridays, even though they appear to be light, is the day where we hold most of our lab classes that run over more than a 50-minute periods. So there tend to be less cars, but you tend to have a different kind of student attending.
Thank you. Do we have other questions for Mr. Lothian from the board? Do anybody else on the board have questions for Mr. Lothian?
I don't know. I don't know if this is a relevant one, Steve, but I just wanted to know. We have studied the internals of parking with respect to your university. Would it have made sense just as part of your study to look the outside, of South Orange of the university campus, that if there's any parking at all, some of the streets that the parking is allowed, was there any sort of a parking available, that could supplement? You said the folks are leaving and going home. I was driving wrong. I just can't believe that, because I live pretty close to the university and there's always parking available. These kids are always parking on my block. I don't know. I'm 2 blocks away.
If they leave the university because of one of the times when the entire campus is full, they don't typically go home, but they'll go out and try and find an off-site space on the street as close as possible to the campus, because they don't want to walk long distances, or they might go to the leased spaces that are a little further away.
And the other, one of the other things that my friend to my right spoke about was policies, and I'm saying, well, if that is the case, and this is just my thinking, maybe a shuttle bus around the town for kids that park on the street, they know the bus is coming, they can still park their cars and get to school. So I'm kind of a bit confused as to why they would go home. What is the university doing to attract them and keep them there?
As I'm sure you remember from the streets where you live, over the course of the years, I think I spoke about this the last time I was up too, there were difficulties as our students were parking on the streets on Fairview and Riggs, etc. Because like anyone else, as has been testified, people are going to tend to try and shove into spots hanging over driveways or even blocking driveways. It's probably, I'm kind of surprised to hear you talk about the looking to parking on the residential streets, because there's a natural collision between the residents and anyone parking, whether it's a student or anyone else in a business. So I think that would be not a desirable thing. And your second part of your question was just
Shuttle bus.
Shuttle bus.
Oh, shuttle bus. Of course, we have the shuttle bus, which is circling constantly, and I think there's talk of linking that up to your shuttle bus additionally. It's running to not only some parking spaces. Of course, you don't want us parking in your spaces, which are also quite tight, but it's running to the train station as well as some of our off-campus locations, Ora Manor, Terrell Manor, etc. So we do have that, and our students are able to track the shuttle bus and the movement of the shuttle bus on their smartphones, so they know when it's coming. So we've addressed that. I would hesitate to want to go back to the village and start talking about trying to get more parking on the streets. But if you want to help me sponsor that movement, I'll make sure your name is on the forefront of it.
Ideally, we'd like to keep all the spaces on campus.
Before we ask for the experts, did you have any other testimony, Mr. Lothian, that you wanted to give?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
Actually, I was curious about the shuttle bus. What is the utilization rate of the shuttle buses, and how often do they circle?
The utilization is heavy. We've added an additional bus this last year. There are times that the bus goes past and is too full to add people. That's why there's been discussion regarding blending that with your village bus. It's something that we continue to monitor and are going to adjust. But it's really not so much solving. It's really for the problem that it's really solving is picking up the folks that are taking the train, picking up the individuals who might be at some of the either one of our university-owned apartment houses, or just picking up people who may be living in homes or renting rooms off campus.
So you don't view any relationship between the shuttle bus and the demand for parking on the campus?
I haven't seen that relationship.
Okay.
Except for the fact, if there were a remote parking lot that we could find, and we do look for those things, the shuttle bus would service that. We're currently looking for a location for remote parking at a distance during the construction period. And it's difficult, and it's certainly not going to be convenient. And it's probably the employees who who we'll be sending to that spot, as it was when we built the original parking garage.
Thank you.
Mr. Dwyer?
I heard a reference, Mr. Garbini, to leased spaces. Are there off-campus leased spaces?
No, the creative individuals will approach residents and they'll lease spaces in their parking, in their driveways.
Okay.
Those are the students you want, right? Those are the future business leaders. We have other questions?
It's the students who are paying, it's the residents who are making the money.
That's true.
I just have a couple of questions for Mr. Lothian. Not so much on parking, because we've had a lot on that. Just want to talk about the traffic flow. A number of witnesses have talked about creating a flow around the athletic center. And I'm just recognizing where the exit from the garage is. How is that going to be promoted? Because it doesn't seem to me as a logical route for somebody to take. So how is that going to function?
All right, this is looking at Exhibit A2. This is the parking deck, the existing one. This is the proposed deck. Here's the circulation pattern that goes around the athletic center. Here's Seton Drive. Currently, all traffic entering the facility can go two directions. It can come in along Seton Drive and enter at this location to the first access to the garage. You can also go around the garage in a clockwise direction, or around the athletic center clockwise direction, but also you'd have to pass the egress to get into the entry. What we're proposing is turn this section, which is on the southeast side of the athletic center, to two-way traffic instead of one-way. So what it's going to provide is the ability for exiting traffic, which now only has the ability to exit the garage and come towards Seton Drive. Currently, there's a traffic director during peak hours who will direct traffic here to try and get during the afternoon peak hours between entering and exiting for the evening students and exiting for the daytime students. But what this will allow is anyone going toward the east on South Orange Avenue or to the eastern side of the campus would stay in the right lane, make a right turn, go around the facility, and make a right turn at, right now there's hardly anyone using that intersection. It's a very lightly used intersection. That will free up the existing intersection to allow the evening students to come in and not have to cross all of the exiting students or faculty that are leaving the garage. This way it'll split some of that exiting traffic up and not create a bottleneck in this short area between the entrance and the exit approaches to the garage. Even though it's a little further, it will be a free flow movement as opposed to sitting here and waiting for a left turn onto Seton Drive.
And this is maybe a question better for Mr. Garbini. Are they planning a second traffic director to direct people out? I mean, I understand the fact that you're giving them the opportunity to go around the athletic center, but you have parked cars there, you have other activities. Are students, the people parking that garage, going to recognize and view that as a reasonable alternative, considering it is significantly longer?
After the first day in the garage and exiting at that location, if they want to make a right-hand turn, that's the movement that they'll probably make.
Our students may not be as bright as the residents who are selling them spaces, but they quickly learn that when you try and come out of that garage and compete with two lanes of traffic coming in to enter that street and the garage, if you come out of the garage and turn right, it's very easy to get to that stop sign and then make a right and exit campus.
Okay.
And since the majority of people that are getting to this point at Seton Drive, 99% will be making a right-hand turn, which will be a lot easier to make. You won't come here and make a left-hand turn.
it wasn't all that long ago that we had two-way traffic around the gym. We changed that because the angled parking gave us a little more parking spaces. So the students at that time were doing just what we were talking about, exiting the garage and going around. The long way turns out to be the shortest way.
Okay. And given that, well, I mean, today, when people are leaving the garage, is it backing up into the garage during those peak exit times of people trying to process out of the garage?
Because during my observation during that Monday, I told you I was out there, it was a nearly full garage. There was only 70 spaces open on the upper level. Then there was starting to be exit while the evening students were coming in, because I was there until 6 o'clock at night. So I observed the transfer between the daytime and evening students. And only 2 to 3 times did I see traffic backed up into the garage. They sort of understand how they're doing it. They're spreading out throughout the hour. So there's not a lot of congestion where it's backing up all the way into the garage. I only observed, about 3 times where it did back up, where it queued up right to Seton Drive. And at that time, the traffic director would let the traffic flow and hold the traffic on Seton Drive.
So with the increasing the garage by 25%, 30% from what it is today, and allowing for the flow to the north around the athletic center, do you feel that will address the traffic flows between the garage and Seton Drive?
In my opinion, yes. That will be a great benefit by providing the two-way circulation.
Okay. That's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
No further questions? We have questions from members of the public. Thank you.
Thank you.
Why don't we take a break right now? It's 9 o'clock. We'll come back in about 10 minutes. No later than 10 minutes. Okay, let's get back into session, and we're waiting for our next expert witness.
Mr. Gregory Woodruff.
I have not been sworn yet, so.
Woodruff?
Yeah, Woodruff.
Please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm the testimony you will give here this evening is the whole truth?
I do.
Please state your name and address.
Sure. Gregory Woodruff, Woodruff, Langen Engineering and Environmental Services, 619 River Drive, Elmwood Park, New Jersey.
All right, what is your profession?
I'm a senior project manager with Langen.
And what kind of work do you do for Langen?
Certainly. I'm involved in various land development applications, evaluating land use compliance, master planning processes, and overall development activities for a variety of different projects that our firm's involved in.
All right, and have you given testimony as a professional planner?
I have, before numerous boards, not yet before this board, but before numerous boards throughout the state of New Jersey.
All right, and what is your educational background, particularly related to planning?
Certainly, I'll start with licenses. I am a professionally licensed planner in the state of New Jersey, as well as nationally with the American Institute of Certified Planners. I have a Bachelor's of Science degree from Muhlenberg College, a Master's of Science from Villanova University. Have testified, I would estimate, on the order of, 30 to 35 times throughout the state, qualified as an expert in planning.
And, all right, so I'd like to offer him as a planner.
Do we have any questions for Mr. Woodruff? We recognize you as an expert in planning.
Great.
All right, in terms of this assignment, what was the nature of your investigation?
Certainly. So obviously our firm was involved in the development of the site plans and many of the studies that you've heard discussion on. So my involvement was both reviewing all those documents, part of project meetings, understanding the overall application, reviewing various background planning documents that at the village level, the downtown vision plan, the smart growth plan, as well as the Seton Hall University campus master plan, which was just recently updated, and of course, obviously, the relevant sections of the South Orange ordinances.
And could you generally describe the variance sought by the university?
Certainly. So obviously, just to refresh everyone's memory, I'll be as brief as possible. I know we've heard a bunch of information through the course of 2 meetings. The project is located in the university zone. It's a permitted use. There is requested 3 specific sections of relief requested. The first is a D6 variance for height. Even though it's a permitted use, it exceeds either the 10 foot or the 10%. Therefore, it graduates to a D6 variance. The other 2 are bulk issues. The first is a rear yard setback encroachment. 30 feet is required, 5 feet is proposed. The second bulk issue is the perimeter fence height. 8 feet with a 3-foot roll is what is identified in the ordinance as permitted. The applicant is proposing a straight topped fence, no roll, at 9.5 feet, thereby technically requiring a variance for that fence height because of the straight section without that roll.
And as to the variance, let's start with the D6. What is the type of proof that is relevant for the board to consider as to that?
Certainly, the first factor that I'd like to bring up is the municipal land use law defines inherently beneficial uses. There's a non-exhaustive list. I apologize. I'm going to read them to you so I don't skip one from their list. That includes hospitals, schools, child care centers, group homes, wind, solar, or photovoltaic energy facilities or structures. That's the list defined in the municipal land use law as inherently beneficial uses. Obviously, as a school, the university meets that definition, thereby presumptively meeting the positive criteria relative to the proofs. And essentially, for an issue like this, you're balancing the benefits that result against any detriments that can be identified, and at the end of the day, the benefits should outweigh the detriments.
All right. So in this particular case, what would be the benefits that you see as related to this application? Certainly.
Well, first, I think it's important, obviously, to talk about the intent of any height restriction ordinance. It's obviously trying to prevent buildings from being too tall and out of character with the size and scale of typical buildings for the permitted use in the zone. In this case, the university zone, I think we all could agree, is a unique zone that was created specifically for Seton Hall University. Relative to some of those background planning documents that I mentioned, I reviewed the Village Smart Growth Plan and the Downtown Vision Plan. Don't go into a ton of depth about planning on the university campus because there is the interesting process that has been set up in the zone whereby the university has to create master plans and come back and present master plans for their own university back to the township and get approval for what they would like to do on their own university, as opposed to a more typical zone within the township where the master planning for that zone would take place as part of a township process. So some of the positive aspects, sort of following up on that unique process for this unique zone. From a planning perspective, we've heard testimony about the existing deficiency demand on campus, and clearly this deck will help meet that existing deficiency demand, as well as provide some of the, for lack of a better term, leeway. I think I heard lubrication in the joints metaphor used, that overflow for optimum efficiency of 10% approximately. So this deck, from a positive perspective, meets existing pent-up demand as well as providing some of that percentage of vacancy for optimum efficiency. Also, the university did go through an analysis as part of the master plan of two different locations to potentially locate this parking deck expansion, and the first of which was on essentially the opposite side of the existing parking deck from where this one is located. This location was specifically chosen for a bunch of different reasons. I'd like to highlight a few and then get into some of the details of those. The first was the chosen location was actually deemed to be less impactful to the surrounding neighbors because the location that was chosen actually provides a greater distance to the nearest neighbor than the non-chosen alternative would have, therefore being less impactful to its surrounding neighbors. Both locations would have been connected operationally to the existing parking deck. However, this connection provides the maximum efficiency because of it not being proximate to the athletic center and some of the activities that need to take place in the vicinity of the athletic center that would have prevented conflicts. This location, while it's adjacent to and as the other would have been to the existing parking deck, provides additional efficiencies from the alternative location. And lastly, this is a highly developed suburban campus with not too many open areas. This, the chosen alternative takes advantage of an area that has been and is currently developed as tennis courts without having to go on to some of the limited open space areas that are on campus to accommodate this parking need. The distances, just for the sake of the board's reference, it's approximately from this location, from the nearest point of the proposed parking deck expansion to the nearest neighboring properties on the order of 200 to 300 feet, and actually the closest lot to the actual parking deck expansion project is actually a university-owned lot, which was another consideration as the university evaluated both locations and tried to choose the one that provided the most benefits relative to the other. Just to reiterate some of the rough numbers as it supports some of the benefits of this proposal, the university has approximately 8,300 students. I'm using round numbers, including administration, faculty, staff, and students. They issue approximately 5,700 parking permits and only have approximately 2,500 parking spaces, and are looking for that roughly 10% vacant operational vacancy for efficiency. The other proof requirement is that the application has to prove that there's no substantial detriment to the public good, no substantial impairment to the intent and purpose of the zone plan. We already talked a little bit about the uniqueness of this zone in the fact that the planning for this zone is really done at the campus level, at the university level, presented back to the township at the planning board level, and is approved there, which is where this location, in addition to the alternate location, were presented and approved So that unique process was undertaken as it was asked to be within the zoning ordinance. Therefore, I do not believe there's a detriment to the intent of what the zoning ordinance was asking the process to go through and accomplish. Relative to other factors of not impairing the public good or the intent and purpose of the zone plan, the parking deck expansion is actually proposed at a height lower than the existing parking deck. The existing parking deck is at 63 feet. The proposed parking deck is at 51 feet. It matches for efficiency. Obviously, the levels need to match each other to make the circulation flow pattern happen, but the deck expansion was actually proposed lower than the existing deck, again, to try and to meet the intent of the ordinance while maximizing the efficiency of both the number of spaces provided in the parking deck, the demand of spaces that needed to be met, and the efficiency of flow within the parking deck. In addition, you heard information, I believe, in the previous session that we had relative to the materials that have been chosen, the design that was selected and effectuated to match the existing parking deck to try and make it appear as one continuous structure aesthetically, which I believe is a benefit as opposed to the other option, which would have been not to have done that and make it a completely new structure aesthetically, which I don't think would have been as beneficial. And relative to the building massing, again, from off campus looking on campus, the building massing is clearly established by the structure that exists there. This is an extension from that building massing toward the edge of the campus and provides a benefit in that it doesn't really, in my opinion, change that massing view from off campus onto campus. So when weighing the benefits of meeting the existing parking demand, the needed percentage, 10% of vacancy for optimal efficiency, weighing those benefits and the benefits that would have on potential off-campus parking conflicts that are and will continue to be created by a lack of parking on campus against the minimal detriment of the parking deck exceeding the permitted height, however still being lower than the existing parking deck, essentially immediately adjacent to it. In my opinion, those benefits outweigh the detriments.
Right. And you use the word substantial, is that correct?
Correct.
So the detriment has to be substantial?
The benefits have to substantial, yes.
Yes. So in order to defeat the negative criteria, there must be a substantial detriment, is that correct?
Correct.
All right. And there must be a substantial impairment of the zone plan, is that correct?
It must be substantial that way, yes.
Yes, to defeat the
Yes.
defeat the variance.
Yes.
Now, this is a unique zone. You testified to that?
Correct. The university zone, in my opinion, the way it's set up within the zoning ordinance is unique in the way it's planned for the uses that are within it, especially in a suburban town like South Orange, to have a university of this size within it, yes.
And so, in your opinion, would there be less risk for there being an impairment of the zone plan in this situation?
Yes, because of the freedom, the uniqueness of this zone, yes.
Right, and did the university present its master plan to the planning board?
Yes, my understanding, and I don't know if someone from the university needs to testify to this, but the master plan showing the two alternate locations was presented and approved to the planning board.
All right, and that's in accordance with South Orange ordinance?
Correct.
All right, so, and with respect to the height variance, do you see the need for any conditions in terms of that variance?
I do not. We've heard discussion regarding the potential to have the parking deck at a lower height, which is an obvious condition that could be imposed. However, when you weigh that against the balance of spaces that are already in deficiency, that operational vacancy that is desired just for optimal efficiency, against the fact that if you don't put all of the height up now, it's my understanding it's essentially not feasible to add levels to the deck in the future, and there aren't really additional open areas based on the existing flow patterns, entrances, issues of that nature to add additional parking in other locations. In my opinion, from a planning perspective, it makes sense that these spaces get added now all in one shot to meet that demand, the existing pent-up demand, as well as that operational vacancy.
Now there's a setback variance.
Correct. We can talk about the two bulk variances. So there are two bulk variances, the rear yard setback, as I referenced, and the fence height. Just to review the proof requirements, under the requirements of a C1 variance, speaking in layman terms, I won't read from the MLUL, I will spare you all that. There has to be some unique characteristic of the site that presents a hardship from complying with the ordinance, essentially. That's the proof variance for a C1 variance. Relative to a C2 variance, the benefits need to essentially, again, outweigh the detriments that might result from the deviation of that ordinance. And both C1 and C2 bulk variances would require to prove that no substantial detriment, again, to the public good and no substantial impairment to the intent and purpose of the zone plan is effectuated. So first, relative to the setback, obviously the intent of a setback ordinance is to provide that distance that a structure should be away from the property line to not impact the adjacent land use. I mean, that's in essence what a setback requirement is really trying to effectuate. However, in my opinion, I think the uniqueness of the adjoining property specific to this location of the campus being a county park setting changes that evaluation of that distance a little bit. Obviously, it's a large campus. The university zone is a large area with a number of adjoining uses. I would assume that 30-foot number was based more predominantly on uses other than the park, because the majority of the campus borders things other than the park. So that 30-foot number really has to do with a setback from uses other than the park, whereas this location uniquely is the park, and you get the benefits of some of that intention of a setback just by nature of the fact that this area is bordered by the park. You don't have an adjoining building right there. We talked about the distance of on the order of 200 to 300 feet to the nearest structure. The nearest lot is actually university owned. So from a positive perspective, I think there are some unique characteristics of this specific portion of the lot, unique characteristics of the adjoining park space compared to other uses that surround the university zone that probably went into the development of that 30-foot setback number, which is a rear yard setback. In addition to that unique condition in that location, the university is also proposing some plantings to try and buffer this parking deck on their property along that area to try and effectuate some of what would be accomplished by a spatial setback through some vegetation, creating some visual buffer to that structure. We've also already heard testimony relative to the width restrictions on the physical structure and its efficiency, the drive aisle width already being at its minimum width, and some of the steps that have been taken to try and narrow this structure to the extent that it can be functionally. I don't believe there's a substantial detriment to the public good or impairment to the intent and purpose of the zone plan. While this proposed parking deck expansion does encroach into that 30-foot setback to a distance of 5 feet, again, that setback encroachment is in a specific location that adjoins a public park open space that doesn't really have structures or a use immediately abutting. There are fields right there, but it's not like you're talking about a residence, a commercial facility, some other type of use that requires, in my opinion, that additional setback distance.
Just to summarize, under the C2 variance, you believe that the benefits of this outweigh the detriments?
Correct. This bulk variance, I would actually believe, I actually evaluate meets the criteria for partially for a C1 variance because of the unique nature of the park being adjacent in this specific area, and definitely meets the C2 criteria of the benefits outweighing the detriments because of the fact that encroaching into the setback allows the university to provide the parking spaces to meet that pent-up demand, as well as that operational efficiency percentage of approximately 10%.
All right, now there's a variance related to the fence. Do you want to describe that?
Sure. The perimeter fence height, again, just to restate it for the sake of this quick discussion here, the ordinance permits 8 feet with a 3-foot roll, so that we're all on the same page. The roll is like that security arc to prevent people from scaling the fence. The applicant is actually proposing a 9.5, so the ordinance would permit an 8-foot straight section and then 3 feet of roll. The university is actually proposing a 9.5-foot straight fence, a little bit more aesthetically designed fence than just a chain link fence. It essentially is going to match the fence that's out there today. And the intent of the ordinance, obviously, is to define that fence height which the township deemed acceptable. In my opinion, relative to the intent of the ordinance, that is being upheld. The intent of the zone plan is being upheld because of the fact that the overall fence height, proposed fence height, will actually be less than what the ordinance talks about. However, just in a slightly different arrangement, it's all one piece of straight fence as opposed to the straight fence with that security roll section on the top. I would also say that from an aesthetic and a planning perspective, I think the 9.5-foot straight fence of a little more architecturally appealing style presents a little bit of a softer edge to campus than what would be otherwise permitted, which would be an 8-foot straight section with that 3-foot roll of security fence. So again, I think from a planning perspective, not only does it meet the intent, but to a certain extent might exceed the intent because it presents that softer edge at the edge of campus. So I don't believe there's a detriment to the public good or a substantial impairment to the intent and purpose of the zone plan as a result of all those factors. So I guess in closing, unless you have given me a...
No.
Great. The requested D6 variance for the structure height exceeding the permitted height by greater than 10 feet or 10%. I believe the proof requirements of the municipal land use law have been met. There are a number of benefits relative to the bulk variances that will be realized as a result of the bulk deviation request that clearly outweigh any minimal detriments. The existing developed suburban nature of the overall campus presents specific practical difficulties in designing the parking deck expansion and while meeting all the bulk while meeting other specific bulk requirements. So in my opinion, the requested D and bulk variances can be granted.
Now, from what you have seen, is this the best location to locate this parking deck on campus?
From what I've seen and the analysis that I've been part of, yes.
Right. You've heard all of the testimony up to now?
Correct.
Okay. No further questions.
Thank you. Mr. Dowd?
Yeah, I'd like to focus mainly on your rationalization or your proofs regarding the rear yard setback or the setback abutting the park. Your testimony is that the existing garage ties to the existing garage visually, and I would say on the side that faces the campus, that's correct. But the side that faces the park, approximately half of the facade that faces the park is a solid wall. It's not open. So the concept of a solid wall, a 5-foot setback, a 9.5-foot high fence, 5 foot away from a solid wall, I'm not understanding how that is visually pleasing and how that's a benefit to anybody. I could see not having the fence in that section and using that 5 feet to plant some planting or maybe treat that facade differently, since it's not an open structure in that area based on the plans that we have, which note that those panels that look like they're openings are actually precast panels. I assume because it's so close to the property line, you're not allowed to have openings in it. I understand the rationale of the geometry of the parking garage, that you're working at certain multiples. So if we accept that, it sort of places the building where it has to be placed. But I sure would like to have some sense that some thought was given to the design of that facade to mitigate the fact that it's 5 feet from the property line.
Sure, I can highlight the things that I believe were done. Again, that fence, I know you referenced the 9.5 foot number, but the ordinance would have allowed, the 8 with the 11. So I think in overall height, from an overall height perspective, the fence is actually lower.
But whether it's 8 feet, 9 feet, 10 feet, it's 5 feet away from a blank wall. So what's going to happen in that 5 feet?
My understanding is there's a proposal for that to be like a mulch or potentially a turf grass area in that gap.
So where's the landscaping occurring?
The landscaping is on either side, based on my understanding of the plan, in those areas that are a little bit wider than 5 feet. There will be a portion of that area that will not have landscaping. As I said, the university has identified areas where they can put landscaping in on their property to put it in to try and soften the edge there relative to deviating.
The most important place is where it's the closest to the property line.
Agree 100%. What I'm pointing out is the additional steps above and beyond that the university is trying to take in the overall plan to try and soften that edge where it can be.
Can you remind me? I thought that we had heard some testimony last time that there was going to be some trees put up in the park along the fence. Did I hear that, or am I remembering?
I'm going to defer to Mr. Garbini, I think, because I don't want to get involved in. I don't know the exact nature of. Sorry.
Yes, when we did some work there on the original parking garage and added the additional stories, we put the fence in, which working with the county and the Mount Vernon Neighborhood Association, this chain link fence is black vinyl in that area. And then what we did in front of that was we cleaned up an area of brush and just undergrowth, which was filled with, not only filled with litter, but also it was somewhat of a hazard because that is a popular walking space around the edge of the park, and there were some concerns because there had been people lurking within that space. So what we did was we cleaned that out, mulched it, and we planted Leland cypress at various spacing along the garage to soften the look. As you get further down to where we are now putting this addition, you have a number of larger trees already in place. What our intention would be to then approach the county, as well as I've already had a conversation with the head of the Mount Vernon Neighborhood Association about that, who said I tried to encourage him to attend this evening, because he said they were in support of this. He said by absence, his lack of presence should speak to his support of it. But we'll approach them to see whether or not they're interested in us continuing the Leland cypress along that edge.
Well, I guess my question. Oh, go ahead.
Well, no, I was actually going to start by asking you if you were done with your question before I asked mine. So.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to ask. Is there a process after, if this application is approved? I thought I also recalled that there's a process in which it needs to be submitted to the park for their approval as well. Is that the, again, I'm not sure if my memory is correct here.
No, it needs to be submitted to the county planning board.
Right.
Okay, but they don't need to approve it.
Yes,
They do
county
need
planning
to-
board needs
county
to
planning
approve
board. So does that mean that the interests of the park will be represented separately from here?
Well, the county planning board is an agency of the county, and so to that extent, I think the answer would be yes. The county planning board's jurisdiction is limited to matters pertaining to drainage and traffic, so they may not be as interested in the setback as this board.
Okay. All right, that answers my question. Thank you.
And in fact, the last time, the planning board deferred some of those aesthetic issues to the Mount Vernon Neighborhood Association.
Well, I guess my, my comment is that you're asking for variance for setback. I know it's abutting a park, and you have the advantage of the fact that there's no immediately adjacent building, but there's a baseball backstop. It's going to be approximately 40 feet from the face of the parking garage, which is, at that point, the point at where the wall becomes a wall with no openings in it. Now, to me, the area that requires the most mitigation is the area where you don't have the ability to do it, unless you have permission from the county to do so. But I guess we don't have any jurisdiction over that, but I just, as I look at these drawings, and I really have no issues on the side of the parking garage that face the Seton Hall fields, because it looks like the rest of the parking garage. But now we have a portion of the garage that's not going to look like the rest of the parking garage, because it's not going to actually have openings in it. And that's sitting there right on the property line, right up against this park. So I guess I'm at a bit of a loss in that I don't see how that is a benefit to anybody. So there's not a question there.
Behind, you've made a statement a couple of times in your testimony that one of the benefits of this structure is to meet the existing parking demand. And as a planner, I want to go back to that question. How do you judge the existing parking demand?
As a planner, I rely on the advice of traffic engineers and transportation engineers who identify that need operationally.
So you take as a given that the need is 575 plus or minus spaces?
I take the testimony that we all heard and the discussion that happened relative to if you just look at the number of existing spaces.
So I understand that, but let me go back to the line of questioning I had before, because you're the planner.
Yep.
Planning is that complex art of balancing and judging and the combination of built structure with how it's used, with the habits of people, and with policies and procedures. And I made the point before that the university already has implemented policies to cut down parking demand in the form of saying freshmen cannot have cars, in the form of saying that sophomores and juniors who live on campus can't have cars. And so clearly the university has set a precedent of thinking about this, right? And saying, yeah, and maybe in the ideal world I'd not have to have any restrictions. But you know what? In the reality of life, in the reality of planning, this is a balancing act, right? In which I think about these things. And so I don't take it as a given that the university needs 575 more spaces. I think we need to understand that number. And so I'd ask you as a planner, when you think about that combination of policy setting, scheduling setting, the use of mass transit, the encouragement of the use of mass transit, the fact that South Orange, part of our vision plan is as a transit village. If you look at the overall trend in planning, as a commuter to New York City, I get commuter benefits from work to encourage me to use mass transit. I work in Midtown where they've shut down streets and created pedestrian plazas to discourage driving. A lot, I see the bike sharing program has started. There is a trend in planning to say, you know what, I'm going to squeeze a little bit and I'm going to give benefits elsewhere to try to mitigate the maybe natural tendency of all of us to sit in our cars and drive, right? And that is what planners do. You balance these things and you look at the overall, the overall beast here, the kind of ecosystem, not just at, what are the number of cars there? Oh, they're full, right? And so I'd ask you as a planner, have you looked at that whole ecosystem and all the steps that the university could take to mitigate this?
Yes, I think, as you said, I think I'm correctly stating you when you said the inexact science of planning.
It's an art. I would say it's more of an art than a science.
So, I think that balancing act in planning is always about planning for the immediate need to try and mitigate that immediate rub, while also advocating for sort of what the long-term goal is. And in this case, what you're talking about, higher utilization of mass transportation, those sorts of the future of what we all hope transportation and commuting will be. And I think we've heard some information, or you've heard some information, I've heard it previously, relative to shuttles and the optimization of shuttles, the expansion of shuttle service. Those sorts of things are being advocated for and implemented on campus as we speak to try and sort of set that bobber out there as to where they want to go. But there's also that immediate rub point of the amount of cars that are on campus now, that frustration level, people parking illegally, people parking in the community and creating conflicts with the community. So to me, I think that's where that complex part of the complex art form comes in terms of meeting that existing conflict while also advocating for that future hopeful condition.
I believe in hope, but I also believe in taking steps to get there, right? How many students, what percentage of students use mass transit today?
I am not certain of those statistics, and I'm not even certain the university has quantities.
Well, let me ask a different question.
Sure.
How much does the university charge to park on campus?
I don't know the exact number.
It's $200. $200 for the 2 semesters?
Yes.
I will assume that does not cover the cost of building a 575 car parking garage. So there's an implied subsidy in that. What does the university do to subsidize people who take the train?
In the past, we've worked with New Jersey Transit, and we've been able to provide, I believe we still do, discount tickets for students. And I think there was also a program that New Jersey Transit ran for a period of time last year for no charge passes. And we continue to work with
those are New Jersey Transit programs, right? Right. My point in bringing this up is again this art of planning is about encouraging good behavior and about taking steps that encourage good behavior. And I'm not raising it because I have an answer to this, but I am looking for evidence and testimony that rather than just saying what's the maximum number of spaces I can get by building a structure of the same height, roughly the same size and contiguous with what I've got in that spot, that there's real planning going on here about how do I manage what is really a long-term problem. I will, this issue of parking, if students don't start using mass transit and walking and doing other things, this issue may come up again, right? There's a planning element here to planning for the long term by encouraging good behavior, by creating alternatives, by supporting those. And I'm looking for testimony about what that process went on in arriving at a request for 575 spaces.
Well, to your point, there are the bike racks. There is efforts for carpooling. There's the work with New Jersey Transit. There's our shuttle bus circling. It's not as if we are not making those attempts. I mean, I know, and I mean, having attended some of the meetings on your own parking garage in town, I'm not a planner, but I don't know that there is a formula that speaks to, because having witnessed your hearing, that there is a formula that says, this is how many spots you need.
What I'm asking the professionals for is testimony about the process you went through in this complex balancing act where you arrived at 575 as the need. That's what I'm asking for.
The process of identifying the number, as we've been talking about, is this delicate balance of trying to build in that operational efficiency number first, because that's sort of a known quantity that just needs to be added to make it operationally function. then from an observational perspective, identifying the amount of periods where there are absolutely no car parking spaces and trying to extrapolate what that might mean in terms of the amount of people who would then go off campus. And then as that number approached a number, and you start to look at how many spaces you can get from an expansion in this location. I mean, as we've talked about, it's hard to quantify the number of people that are leaving campus, the number of people that are constantly illegally parking. But it's not, based on the testimony we've heard from traffic professionals and things like that, as it feeds into the planning process, it's not completely out of whack that number is on the order of that 10% number, that additional 10-12% number that adds up to that 556 number that we're talking about. The 10% of operational efficiency gets you're about 250, and then you're talking about another 300 spaces on top of that. So without having a counter and being able to say exactly, how many people are leaving campus on a daily basis from a gross planning perspective, again, based on the technical input from traffic, from a traffic planning perspective, that number is not completely outside the scale of possible as to what is leaving campus and needs to be accommodated and brought back on campus to reduce the conflicts potentially on campus. Yeah.
Mr. Simple.
I want to take it a little step further with respect to creative thinking. For instance, to stay within the variance. Let's suppose the number was 420 cars instead of 594. But what we do with this parking spot is saying, well, look, instead of this be designated to all types of cars, we call this our small parking car lot, and only a particular size or particular type of cars be allowed to park in this area. And what we do, instead of 594, it might be, let's suppose it's 500, and we actually reduce it to fit within the variance. Something creative, instead of saying 594 is my number and I'm going to fit all types of cars. What we try to do is let's bring it. Let's bring it within the variance, but instead of all types of cars, we ask the university to designate this as and again, this is just creative thinking, small car parking only. So now, all of a sudden, we reduce the size, reduce the number of cars if possible, and we actually make it work.
Well, the experts are gathering. Let me say, we have had compact car spaces. The difficulty is when there is, in the period of time that there is not enough space, people they see that spot and they shoehorn into it. So it becomes, the college experience and the right to pay, $40,000 to attend Seton Hall. It should not be about getting a parking ticket or not being able to find a parking space. It's our intention to try and make that particular nuisance item go away. And quite frankly, I don't know what what the science of this all is, or what the formula of this all is. And apparently, I guess even the village is challenged with that as it is looking to solve its parking issues. But the issue is, suppose we came up with that formula and it said we needed 665 spaces. The issue really is we have to deal with what we have to deal with. When the enrollment was down, and the periods that I mentioned earlier, when we had 970 incoming freshmen, and the year before that 1,050, in the year before that 1,090, we did not change the number of decals we offered. We didn't open it up to a different category of resident students. It remained just for seniors, and as I mentioned at the other meeting, for nursing and education majors for the period of time they had off-campus clinicals. So we're not changing our policies. We were intending to try and manage the issue as best as possible.
Because I want to answer your question somewhat directly, and I wasn't trying to avoid your question. I wanted to confirm with Mr. Helmer. There are spaces within the deck that are, and he can provide a little more detail if you're interested in hearing it, but there are spaces in locations where a fully sized space couldn't be accommodated, where, it will be signed compact car only, so those somewhat, I think you used the term out of the box thinking, was implemented in certain locations where possible. And I don't know if you want to add detail to that, or if you're interested in more detail.
Somehow the 594 just can't add up to me that we have to be at 594. Why can't we try to be within the variance?
Within the setback.
Within the setback. Just think about the park, the kids playing, and all they're seeing is a big wall, and 5 feet, and somebody playing baseball run into that fence, and whether it's I'm glad it's that high, because if it's only 8 plus the security wire, some kid going high up and hurting themselves on that. So I do think we have made a real effort to mitigate the variance.
Did you want to address Mr.
Could
Semper's
I?
question?
Just a couple things that are on my mind, and one is, a lot of times, in the parking industry, the market dictates, what people will drive, and in the parking garage right now, predominantly the stall sizes are 8'6", and we do have 30 spaces in there that are considered compact in the area that we had actually had to reduce because of the setback condition that we have. We also have on the top level of the garage approximately 70 spaces or so of 9-foot wide stalls. Just to give an indication of the different sizes of the stalls. In terms of the setback, I will say, just from a parking professional standpoint, that if you were to reduce the width of the garage, and say you took off 150 or 180 spaces along that entire elevation, I would say that you still would not be able to get within that setback requirement, and it would still be very inefficient. From my perspective, advising a client to create a one-way doubly loaded and a one-way singly loaded module is really not good parking practice. The last thing is, I would say, as testimony heard earlier, is that the evaluation of the site in terms of feasibility of parking in different locations of the campus, resulting in this particular location as the most beneficial, it's most practical to expand it to the level that you can now, because if you did reduce it a level, you would not have the ability to come in later and expand that particular level, just because the parking garage structural system is precast, and it would have to be a precast system in the future, and there would be no way to actually erect the parking garage in the future. So from that perspective, it made sense to increase it to the level that we could as well. So just a couple thoughts.
Mr. Semper, are you through with your question?
Yes, I am.
Mr. Shapiro was next. Mr. Shapiro?
Yes, I'd like to get back to a previous line of questioning that I'm curious about. As one who's just had 2 grandchildren graduate college, one this year, one last year, I'm very cognizant of the desire of college students to cluster their classes as much as possible between Tuesdays and Thursdays, and no earlier than 9:30, or no earlier than 10 or 11 in the morning, and hopefully not later than 3 in the afternoon, and try to get as much time free as Mondays and Fridays as possible. So that leads me to wonder, what is the balance between where student behavior drives policy of the university versus the university's policies having the ability to drive student behavior and mitigate problems such as peak parking demand? It just seems to me that if the university looked at spreading some of the most popular classes to Mondays and Fridays, that in itself would be a mitigating factor in mitigating peak parking demand, plus other types of policy changes that could be implemented to modify the behavior that leads to the congestion.
As I indicated earlier, the key to this problem that we're dealing with on campus really has to do with class scheduling. And in fact, we do look at that. And as I also indicated earlier, yes, that is human nature for students to try and to get their classes in a certain time frame and certain days of the week. Even though the campus is Fridays is the latest day of the week, it doesn't mean that the campus is empty. And as I indicated also, during that period of time is when some of the laboratories or classes are some of the classes that run over 2 periods are taking place. So there is, during that period of time, you have the individuals who are coming to campus are staying longer, but they need to come because those are the only times that certain classes are in fact offered. Now, the issue, you get to a break point where if the students, because keep in mind, I don't know about where your students, your grandchildren attended, but a lot of our students also work. And they need to work to meet the tuition, cost of tuition, and hold down their need to borrow money. So many of them are also dealing with part-time jobs that are running a lot of times through the weekend. So Friday there's a pressure there. Some of the pressure comes in about them being able to attend evening classes. And a lot of those are the people who generally have vehicles, more so than the residence hall students. So we do deal with it. Do not believe that this is something. Our only answer looking at this is in fact build a parking garage. We have been looking at it. We will continue to look at it. It brought us to this costly decision that brought us to here tonight to add that parking, so we have the option to be able to provide a service to our students without the frustration of trying to find parking spaces.
Well, again, I keep getting back to the fact that we're looking at only at the maximum of a 10% variance in parking. The peak parking is still concentrated in those few days, and I guess I'm just not convinced that by both modifying the student schedule to the type of classes that have the largest attendance, that are the most popular, to spread them to the Mondays and Fridays. Yes, both of my grandchildren also work at part-time jobs. They worked in the evening and they worked on the weekends, but it didn't interfere with their classroom time. So that, again, it seems to me that there's many steps that can be taken in the management of the university to mitigate this cluster of peak parking, other than simply putting up more concrete. That's my point.
And I'm indicating to you, we have, in fact, worked on that for years. As we also work with the push and pull with the problem of dealing with parking within the neighborhoods, where they wanted less parking on the street. So this is a complex issue. And the heart of it all, like with your grandchildren, students can make a decision to attend or not to attend. And if they have a bad experience, even if they may remain at our institution, they go home and tell, their counselors, the people at home, whether at home is in Morris County or home could be in Illinois. These stories get back to us. So no, we have been looking at this. This is an issue and scheduling is an annual issue that even our board challenges us with. If I knew you were going to want to have a treatise in this, I could have had the people from our institutional research present to discuss how we're laying out the classes, and how we are trying to drive the students into these various times of the day and evening. But these questions didn't come up, prior to the meeting.
Mr. Garabini, if I may ask, continuing upon what you're saying, perhaps a different way that I'd like to hear from you is, you have limited space on campus. You're not in a field in the middle of nowhere, so you have to pick and choose, right, what you want to do. So why did you choose if you had all else being equal, is a parking deck the first thing you'd go to as your board, as an educator, or would you look to a classroom first and why end up with a parking deck versus a classroom? It would seem to me you'd want to put it in a classroom, but you chose a parking deck.
Put a classroom?
Well, I'm not saying that very well. There's a limited amount of space you have on your campus. You chose a parking deck. Did you consider other things? As classroom space. There's a calculus you make. I'm trying to get you were referring to this.
In fact, you may or may not know that we are renovating Stafford Hall. If you're familiar with campus, it's one of the oldest buildings in the center of campus, circa 1880. It is a classroom building now. The planning board just approved us to replace that with a more modern building. But additional classroom space is going to exacerbate the parking issue. That really isn't really addressing the concern that we're addressing here tonight.
Let's say you're spending $18,000 a space.
Correct.
Would you be doing that if you didn't have the need to do that?
No, absolutely not.
Explain that.
I mean, the decision to build the parking deck, and that brings us here before you tonight. I mean, we have spent at various levels of the institution, including the president, and our academic vice president, and our institutional research office, has had to convince our own board that this was an expenditure that needed to happen, and that we had taken every other opportunity to try and avoid it happening, whether it's the shuttle bus, whether it's the mass transit. So we've gone down that route. We don't want to go back to the village and look for any additional parking. I think we got all the max we can get along South Orange Avenue. But that just creates there are difficulties with that kind of issue as well. But to answer your question, we have been down that road, and quite a bit of effort has gone to that. And our board, both finance and academic affairs, have asked these questions before this application was made.
Thank you. Wanted to follow up with Mr. Woodruff. Mr. Woodruff, you said that this met a C1 variance. Do you have that? You have your.
My reference to the C1 variance was to the setback, because I was talking about the unique nature of the section adjacent to the park, that unique site characteristic that creates the hardship to complying with the setback.
Creates the hardship. Where's the hardship?
The hardship is in that and again I referenced this variance meeting portions of a C1 requirement as well as a C2. I was highlighting.
Okay, well, where's the C1? Where's the hardship?
Certainly, the hardship is in, we talked about the functional way that parking structures are dimensioned and designed and constructed. And to do that, we heard testimony relative to even to shortening that creates a non-functional layout to shorten it. And even at that shortening distance, we heard testimony that likely would not even meet the setback requirement. Okay. So again, that was, as I said, the entire justification for that variance isn't resting on the C1 criteria. I was adding that as an addition to the benefit
Okay.
outweighing the detriment, and was just highlighting that as some additional justification.
Thank you. Mr. DeScala, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I did. I guess the hardship that you didn't state is that if you put the deck somewhere else, like in the middle of the ball field that Seton Hall currently uses, then that would destroy the ball field. And so that's the only space that you could put it. And so that combined with the size, just to help out that a little bit. But the question I have is kind of going towards a lot of this discussion about the planning process and how this is the right place, and it's part of your testimony earlier, and some of the materials that you provided were that there's a master plan that is being done within the zone by the university that needs to be approved by our planning commission, that in fact had this parking deck as a location that is an alternative location with another one, that master plan defined and was approved by our planning board. Could you talk a little bit more about whether or not the previous defined location was in the setbacks, whether or not the previously defined and approved location had the same number of parking spaces?
I can testify that the master plan document, I believe we might even, do you have it? It's always fun when you have the stuff right in the bag that relates to the question.
That is useful. I wasn't able to find, well, I have that one, but I don't have one that has both potential locations on it. I couldn't find it. There it is. Okay.
So and this was marked as A1 in this hearing, correct? In the previous session of this hearing. And I think there was discussion about these two locations. You can see them on there. The shape, the footprint of the location that's part of this application is consistent with the footprint of, for lack of a better term, that alternate, I think it's labeled as options A and B. As labeled as option A is essentially the footprint that you see before you as part of this application.
Right. So I appreciate that, and I also appreciate that it was shown to us previously. I'm just looking for some planning testimony to describe, what the planning board approved. So the footprint's the same, is the height the same, the number of spaces the same. Certainly, I can see that it's in the setbacks. Was it presented to the planning board, or is it in the master?
I'm going to defer to Mr. Cook. I was not part of the presentation of this to the planning board.
Both of these options were presented to the board. There was some testimony presented to the board as to why the university was going to add additional parking deck space, and the board approved the overall concept of the master plan. I mean, they didn't get into the height, although the height is higher. I think there was prior testimony that the non-selected option is higher than the one that was selected. Both have setback issues. Is that what I just said? Is that correct?
Correct. That was my earlier testimony, the non-selected option, because of its proximity to the athletic center.
I certainly get that.
Okay.
I understand the selection between the two. I just want to make sure that we as a board understand that there was a planning process that was followed,
right? That
it was presented to the planning board, and I wanted to hear from you that it was presented that you needed it, that the university needed additional parking, and these are the two alternatives that you proposed, and that they approved these alternatives in concept.
Certainly.
Yeah, but the planning board, I mean, there's a variance needed, right? So the planning board can say, we understand you need more parking, but the reason they're in front of this board is because the choice they made requires a variance, and that's the job of this board.
The planning board doesn't vet their master plan, as I understand. It's just presented. Is that correct?
No, there was a hearing, there was a presentation, there was a resolution adopted.
To adopt it. Well,
yes.
You're the attorney for the planning board.
No. Yes, there was, as you said, it was an overall concept master plan. There weren't changes made by the planning board that I recall at all, and it was just adopted as a plan and policy document that they believed would be in their best interest for future development of the campus.
Okay, so they clearly didn't look at it with the scrutiny that we're giving it tonight, but it certainly passed their eyeballs.
Right.
And they could have, if they wanted to, have objected to something that they really found objectionable. Is that something that's done? Ms. Gruhl?
Yes, I agree with what Mr. Dwyer said, and I also agree with what you stated, which if the planning board did have the discretion to make comments about the master plan, but they certainly didn't go into the detail that this board has the right to do in terms of the jurisdiction.
In a master plan like this, let's say if I'm on the planning board and I happen to say, oh, that's really close to the setback, that's in the setback, I don't like that. Am I going to pipe up and say, I'm not going to accept this master plan? Does that ever happen? It probably doesn't.
It hasn't happened to my knowledge, Mr. Chairman.
Well, the reason I bring it up is because I think that it's not insignificant that the planning body for this community has approved in concept the master plan that was put forward by Seton Hall. And just as I wouldn't discount our own master plan, I would certainly go into the village's master plan with more detail when I'm looking at a variance. But if the master plan says that the intent of this zone is to do something, to allow this kind of development or that kind of development, I would certainly take that into consideration. And so all I'm saying is that I want to make sure that we as a board recognize that this has been looked at.
I mean, I think it goes to the issue of the uniqueness of the zone. I mean, the master plan ordinance exists. It's a distinct ordinance. The parking ordinance exists as a distinct ordinance. And the zone is obviously unique. So I think that the town fathers have certainly recognized that Seton Hall is a unique element of the community.
Thank you.
Any other questions, Mr. Discala, at this point? Okay. Other questions?
Yeah,
Mr. Parlapiano.
Can you testify about the? I'm assuming if we add
94.
94.
Just say 600.
Spaces that there'll be more traffic, there'll be more cars. Did you consider that in any testimony about the impact of additional cars at the peak time? Yes, yes, please.
Sorry, I wasn't sure if you were.
I apologize.
When you said traffic, I wasn't sure if you were.
From a planning perspective, right?
Right. From a planning perspective, did evaluate that or contemplate that. A couple things that I worked my way through is that first, many as we discussed, this is a lot of this, or a good portion of this is demand or trips that already exist on campus, whether it be people coming, getting frustrated, leaving campus. Secondarily, and maybe more importantly, where the parking deck expansion is proposed, because it's proposed to extend off the existing deck, the entrance and exit to that expansion will be from the existing deck. So in terms of traffic flow and traffic impacts, those are all internal to the campus. So my analysis, was from the perspective of traffic impacts to the community. And in my mind, community, in this board's mind, means the community of the village, not necessarily the community of the campus, because the community of the campus is the purview of the university. So they clearly, in choosing option A rather than option B, are comfortable with what this expansion would do to the traffic internal to their campus. And because it's so central to campus, which is another nice thing, that it's central to campus, those impacts are going to be concentrated at the center of their campus. So the impacts of traffic to the village from a planning perspective seemed nearly non-existent.
Am I correct in recalling that it was actually, there was testimony that it would reduce the traffic in the village potentially because it would cause students not to have to come in to the university and then go back out again and then park out there? So reducing at least one trip that the overage. Did I hear that testimony?
Yes.
That it would in fact, reduce it?
Yes, I believe you did hear that testimony, yes.
I have one more question about the setback. You made a point that a bit like the C1 point, that I just felt was a bit of a stretch, and I'd like to hear more about it, which is, you said the 30-foot setback on the zone, that it didn't, your view was, well, that was really put there because in most places, the university zone abuts residential property. And so the 30 feet gives a buffer to the residential property. But that the 30 feet setback probably wasn't really intended for the area that faced the park. Is that your testimony?
My testimony was that the 30-foot setback is a rear yard setback that obviously encompasses an area larger than just this specific location, and therefore contemplated a multitude of abutting uses, not just the park use, but that this specific location is just abutting the park use.
But the zone says 30 feet everywhere, and as it doesn't.
Correct.
In theory, they could have said 30 feet everywhere except where it faces a park, in which case 5 feet, right? They didn't say that, and I just. Correct. You know, I mean, I think you were making an argument that there's something special about this site, and this sort of gets back to the C1 question. And I just, I just think on that point you're stretching it a bit. That the town, when they created the zone, could have been specific. I think. The fact that there's no house in the park, I think one of my colleagues mentioned the ballpark is, the baseball diamond is so many feet away. Enclosing a park in a 50-foot wall is still something. It may not be someone's backyard, but it is the yard of the people who play in it. And I wouldn't want to leave on the record the idea that, there's something special about this location that relieves it from that 30-foot setback requirement because it abuts a park. The zone says 30-foot setback, and I think there is an impact on the park, as a number of us have said. Not to say there may not be a balancing test that says you still do it, but there is an impact on the park, and the zoning applies in that section as well.
Right.
Thank you.
Do we have other questions? Do our experts have any questions?
I don't.
No, I don't.
Does the public have any questions? Okay. Mr. Coakley, do you have any other expert?
Well, I think I would like to take the opportunity to have this matter carried for another month until I can determine if I want to present another expert.
Cannot hear you.
I said I'd like to move this matter forward for an additional month to another hearing date until I can determine whether I want to bring another expert.
You mean until August,
Well, whenever it's the board's convenience.
not the July meeting?
Because the July meeting is full?
July meeting is next week.
Oh, right.
Yeah, the July meeting, we have two cases already that we're set to hear. And I'm sure that will occupy a normal.
He wants more time, probably.
Yeah, and you're not going to be ready in 1 week, so I suppose. So then we would carry you to August.
I'm a bit confused. You asked for a special meeting for today.
Well, the board has raised a number of questions, and we'd like to consider whether they can be addressed in a better manner.
I think that's good choice. I don't have a.
You often ask us to make comments so that there could be kind of a temperature taken. Should we do that tonight as well?
Well, if you want to make a motion to accept the application, you can do that if you want. You can make a motion.
The applicant is saying they're not finished with their case.
But she could.
I'm the newbie. I don't know.
Well, look, Mr. Coakley wants to present more expert testimony. You're not saying you're going to want to modify your application.
No, I'm not saying that at all.
Right. So if somebody is just, by golly, I think this is great, this is best thing since sliced bread, they can make a motion and see if somebody seconds, and then we got to take a vote on it if that's where the board is.
Even though he's asked for an extension. I mean, if we deny it, then aren't we basically disallowing him the extension that he requested?
Well, no, it would only be if we approved it. Then he doesn't need his expert witness.
But you're taking that risk, aren't you?
Well, if that's what we wanted to do, I would prefer that if they want to present further expert testimony, that they be allowed to do so. And I get the sense from the board that you all still have a lot of questions on this. I don't get the sense from the board that this is a slam dunk, an obvious approval. But certainly, if you want to discuss now among the board about what your concerns are or want to hear from the board what their concerns are, I think that's fine.
Yeah, I guess I'm a little concerned because I feel like that some of the questions are implying that there wasn't an extensive amount of due diligence, and also that there isn't a lot of consideration to the cost and the need. But I feel like that's a very strong assumption coming through in the questions. So I guess I just wanted to take a temperature of what's going on to see if they really need to come back or if everyone feels that way. I mean, I know that what I do behind the scenes, we do an incredible amount of due diligence to get to a table, and I think that they've probably done it, but the board doesn't seem to be comfortable with that, and I guess I don't understand why still.
What's the expert that you're thinking about presenting, Mr. Copeland?
Well, I mean, we'd like to hear the further comments from the board, but it would be to develop more information about the number of parking spaces that we're carrying out and the need for that.
I certainly heard that from the board. It seems to be several people on the board would like to see more math, like to see more analysis that justifies the number of spaces that are being requested.
I would agree with that to some degree, but I'd also like some thought given to that wall, that if we're going to accept the wall 5 feet away, that something's got to be done to that wall. Design, I'm talking design. Some surface treatment, vines growing up it, something to wet it better to the site.
A ballpark facade?
Yeah.
Green monster.
I mean, as campy as it sounds, a green monster is not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, I think it could be it is the backdrop to a baseball field. So something that could make it fit in better.
Mr. Shapiro?
Yeah, okay, I have three concerns. One is exactly the one that you raised. I mean, I'm not aware of any parks that have a solid concrete wall 5 feet from their boundary, and I cannot see how that's a benefit of any kind. I see that as a detriment. I have concern about the size. I think that the size is substantially in excess of the need. I'm not convinced at all that there's a need for 550 additional spaces. I think that probably half that much would be more than adequate, given some modification of policy of the university to mitigate the peak demands by spreading out the classes and spreading out the students so that they're not all clustered in the areas which we see. And that basically are my problems.
Yeah, if I may summarize what I'm hearing from Mr. Parlapiano and Mr. Shapiro, is that the math that you presented is you showed that the deck is full, particularly noon to about 3 or so on many days, particularly Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. You have several spaces there, 50 to 70 on average, but many days it's full. And you assert that they're using town parking. You don't provide evidence, although I agree with you, the town doesn't want the students parking on the streets, so don't get the impression that we do. But that's an assertion. And so you come up with this, you've established there, the parking deck is often full. Therefore, we need 500 spaces. That leap, what the board is saying, that leap from it's often full to we need 500 spaces, There's where there's no math, and that's where people have their concern. And I don't know if you have the math. I don't know if it's a lot of guesswork involved. Maybe there is more math that you can present. If that's what you're looking for in expert testimony, I think that's where you should seek it. Is that correct, Mr. Parlapiano? Okay.
There's one other thing that I spoke about creativity, and I drew a little picture here in my book, and I put Seton Hall, and I said, let's suppose we create a perimeter around Seton Hall, let's suppose for 5 miles, and we encourage the kids coming from Newark, Union, the north, south, east, and west, and we say what we're going to do is create a shuttle bus environment, which part all the kids will really have to drive to South Orange or drive to some place where they can find parking. And Seton Hall comes up with something creative that, pick these kids up in this perimeter so the kids know, guess what? I can park maybe in a parking lot in East Orange, maybe a parking lot in Livingston, maybe a parking lot in Union, and we all get there. There's a bus running continuously day and night. So we take
parking rides.
Yeah, a park and ride solution. We take care of this. My drawing is kind of cryptic, but this is what I drew: Seton Hall on a circle. And let's, just to get my thoughts together.
Well, we could explore whether anyone else does that type of thing.
NYU does that.
Rutgers.
Do our experts have anything to offer to this?
NGIT.
Not telling you that you should, but I don't know if anything else to offer the applicant.
Not at this point in time.
Okay, so do you have a sense of what the board is looking for if you want to carry this till August?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So then we will carry you to August, and you'll be first. We don't have anybody scheduled for August right now, I don't believe.
I actually have one more thing that they could consider talking about, and even though this has already gone by the planning board, but some description of why you can't encroach on the ball field space, or maybe put the garage in a different location. So just to show that you've done that, so that we can understand that as well.
Not sure I understood what you just said. Why we can't?
In other words, why you can't put this garage space as an appendage in some other direction off the existing garage. You've shown 2 different alternatives. Why wasn't one considered along the roadway, or 10 feet deeper into the ball field space than the one that's currently designed to show? It's just a matter of clarifying that rationale.
Just to build on Mr. Discalo's comment, is there a way to shift the deck to the west so that you increase the minimum setback from 5 feet to something greater? I recognize that the outfield is there.
We can have show you the NCAA regulation.
That's fine. Something along that's fine.
As I have said already, the university has considered all these options.
Right.
And thank you for allowing the fact that we have been mindful about this before we spend this money. But and thank you for giving us the suggestions. But that's the answer. That'll be the answer that we'll bring to you on the 11th field, please.
What would be the date of that meeting?
August 6th? August 6th at 7 p.m. Okay. So we will carry this application to August 6th at 7 p.m. Seton Hall understands what the board is looking for, if they're going to present more expert testimony, and we'll pick up where we left off. Okay? All right. Thank you. Before we leave, is there any other parliamentary stuff that we need to do? Our board? No?
We just have 2 applications next week.
We have 2 applications next week. Okay? Okay. All right. Good evening.